Well, you've done it again. Your book, Journeys to the Mythical Past, is another page turner filled with exciting leads pointing to ancient contact
Thank you.
with an advanced race. You spend a lot of time on the secret chamber you say is inside Egypt's Great Pyramid. How and when did you discover it?
Well, it goes back a number of years, and it took a number of years to actually find out what's behind the so-called niche there. And I must give credit to one of those who went with me there, who volunteered to crawl in, not knowing if he'll be able to crawl back out.
Oh.
And we have photographs and drawings, and there is it's a secret chamber because it is being kept a secret. I really don't know why it is kept a secret. Maybe because it's the tunneling into it was not authorized or not supposed to take place. So if people go to Egypt and visit the Great Pyramid, they should ask to go and see the so-called Queen's Chamber, which is usually locked to public access for obvious reasons by now, and ask to see the secret chamber, which is still a secret, except that it is now described in my book.
Well, there seems to be a double mystery here. Who dug the tunnel to the chamber, and why the chamber's existence? Why do you believe it still is being kept secret?
Of course, I don't know. If I knew, I would say already in the book. But the digging into it has gone on for a number of years, and in my book, which you are discussing with me, Journeys to the Mythical Past, I show a series of photographs of how the niche through which the tunnel was dug, how it has changed over the years, covered this way, covered that way, etc. So it is all documented photographically by me, not only by say-so. Obviously, I think, Bob, you'll agree with me that obviously no one could have continued to dig inside for several years while officially admittance to the Queen's Chamber was blocked, unless it's somebody with the authority to say about Giza and in general about those antiquities in Egypt, do this, don't do that. So I think the finger points is somewhere quite high, and it wasn't authorized. And now the second puzzle, of course, is once it was done, and whoever it was broke into that undiscovered chamber until that break-in. What did they find there? Was the chamber totally bare and empty, which is possible, or was there anything there? Because over the centuries, the Egyptian, the Muslim Caliph Al-Mamun, who broke into the pyramid through the entrance through which people now visit it, went in search of treasure, because there was always the belief that there is a secret chamber in the pyramid filled with all kinds of treasure. So was anything found? Now, maybe the reason that it's not announced and kept hush-hush is because what was found there. This is a mystery within a mystery within a mystery.
Well, I believe there's no way in the world they would not have known someone or that this chamber existed if they have surveillance
Yeah.
video cameras there.
That was my first tip off to go in one day
Hmm.
and see that there are two surveillance video cameras, and then the question is what for?
Yeah, what for? And also that's something else is you describe as sand, but it's blue-green granules.
Yeah, that's another mystery. As I describe in the book, I took some of it as a samples. It was tested for me at the University of Cincinnati. No particular radiation level was discovered, but the sand was an unusual kind of sand. I mean, it's not, sand. It was some very, very fine sand, and there were those blue-green granules in it. So I don't know. I really don't know. It's still a mystery, and all I can do, which I did finally in this book, is to report it and let others take it from there.
Well, you did make a special trip in 1997, and something happened when you were exploring the inside of the Great Pyramid. You want to tell us about that?
Well, what happened is that it was almost my final visit and trip to Egypt or to anywhere, because I have been trying for years to find a way to get permission or somehow to be allowed to enter the so-called relieving chambers above the so-called King's Chamber. I keep saying so-called because it is all these are misleading names. When people refer to the King's Chamber, there was no king and nobody was buried there. But these are the names that people use to identify it. So there are several narrow spaces that are called relieving chambers above the so-called King's Chamber, and it is there that somebody called Howard Wise claimed to have discovered writing in red paint that supposedly also spells the name of Khufu or Cheops. So that's why the pyramid is attributed to him. And I had my doubts about it. I analyzed this at great length in a previous book titled The Stairway to Heaven. But and then I saw a facsimile at the British Museum, which sort of confirmed my doubts. But I always wanted to actually see and visit and see with my own eyes the things, the puzzles I write about. And finally I got permission to do that. And it was a very odd day with all kinds of unexplained delays and all kinds of we whispering among the Egyptians in charge and so on and so forth. But finally I and two others who traveled with me were allowed to go in, and a ladder was set up, and I was supposed to start climbing. And then somehow, from out of nowhere, a very heavy log of wood fell or was dropped on my head and knocked me down, and I was all bleeding. And luckily I survived it because I was rushed. I was given all kinds of anti-tetanus and other injections, which is not a pleasure in so-called Egyptian medical facilities, but obviously I survived it. So and to this day I don't think it was an accident.
Well, I've never known of too many pieces of wood inside the Great Pyramid.
Yeah, it's built entirely of stone.
So, therefore it had to be put there by somebody. And takes movement to obviously knock down a piece of wood at that particular time. So it doesn't seem to be accidental to me. And I'm not surprised, Zechariah. The reason why I'm saying that is because the importance of the possibility that this is a forgery is something, when we've watched over the past 15 to 20 years as some of the more interesting, what I find, research and theories, especially the age of the Sphinx and the kind of problems that
Right.
those archaeologists and those people had. And then when you take a look at the work of their first name Stephen Schwartz, when he was in Egypt, and they were laying out what they could determine by other paranormal means, other chambers beneath the Sphinx and elsewhere, especially out in the desert. They would come back and find all of the lines that they had established and tied down. They were moved. So that when they returned the next day, they weren't in the same place at all. And this kind of slowing down of your work and frustration is a pattern. And I don't believe any of this is accidental, because there was much controversy just over a decade ago, and it was never resolved. But unfortunately, I think Egyptology is pretty much concerned about the importance of some of their theories, and which is that Khufu or Cheops built the Great Pyramid. You believe that the Cartouche is forged is it above the king's chamber?
Yes.
Please tell us about this theory.
Well, it's a rather long and complicated story, which one has to illustrate, which I do in my several books on the subject. But basically, the name Khufu in hieroglyphics is very simply written. There is a sign, looks like a snake or a serpent, which is the vowel U, and there is a symbol which is read or pronounced as an F, and then there is a symbol which is a circle with crossed lines that supposedly represent a sieve that is pronounced so it's U, F, U, Khufu, which we call Cheops in English. And whoever did it, and there is a very detailed story based on Weiss's own diaries, what happened this day, what happened that day, and lo and behold, after nothing was found in any of those chambers, suddenly some writing in red paint was discovered, and among those various symbols, many of them meaningless, there was this royal cartouche that spelled Khufu, except that there was one little problem, and that is that the circle that should have crossed lines to be pronounced was really a circle with the dot or a smudge in it in the center, which is really pronounced Ra and stood for the name of the supreme god of Egypt, Ra. So it is quite inconceivable that anyone would have used the name or written the name of the supreme god in vain, attributing the pyramid as if the god himself built it, when supposedly King Khufu built it. So the cartouche does not really spell Khufu, and I show it with illustrations in the book. And now, who actually did it? So I go into great details, especially in the previous book, Stairway to Heaven, and touch on the subject here enough to explain to the reader why this whole business with who built this pyramid is part of the subject of this particular book, Journeys journeys to the mythical past, because, as you mentioned in your introduction, Bob, it deals also with the Vatican, and in a way, by the way, as I was, thinking about our interview and looking through the book, is that in so many ways, this book is really ahead of the news, because I have there a chapter about the Antikythera mechanism.
Well, you must be psychic, because obviously that's where exactly we were headed right
just
after this.
Two, 3 days ago, it made headlines. Now, a month ago, a guy called Father Funes, who is head of the Vatican Observatory now, he was interviewed by the Vatican's own daily newspaper, Osservatore Romana, and he made statements there that again made headlines around the world, and that is that the Vatican does not deny the possibility of extraterrestrial life. Now, it so happens that I have a chapter on that in which I mention my correspondence with the same Father Funes, but all he did was really repeat briefly something that came to light in my public. There were hundreds of people present when I had a dialogue with Monsignor Balducci, who is in charge of those things, or was in charge of those things in the Vatican, who is on the one hand a fan of mine, read my books, and on the other hand represents the Vatican's position on the subject. And he said, as far as the Vatican is concerned, the extraterrestrials exist. So that was also in the book ahead of the headline news. So
well, obviously,
and I'm sure, Bob, that you mentioned some of the other chapter headlines. The Nazca lines.
yeah, let's touch on that now.
So I'm sure that whoever will read the book, or already read the book, will really find headline news about this or that or that or that coming in the next months, if sadly years, but in the next months, because the book, by supposedly dealing with the past, is really dealing with what we should expect and anticipate.
So it's somewhat prophetic in that way.
Well, it's prophetic because it's to a great extent, its predecessors too, especially the one that just preceded it, the end of days, really are based on biblical prophecies. And I think you too, I believe that all those prophecies will come true. The question is when, or in what form, or what shape, or with what intensity, but there's no doubt in my mind that what was told then is what we will witness.
Let's go back to this Antikythera mechanism. Why do you believe it is an advanced astronomical computer, which is obviously millenniums before its time?
Well, the news a few days ago dealt with a new study suggesting that, among other things, because one of the puzzles, of course, not only who had the technology to make it and who had the need for it, but so once somebody went to all the trouble of creating this amazing thing, which I'll touch upon in a second, is what was it for? So they made the headlines because they said, among other things, it also enabled to set the dates for the Olympic Games. So a week before the start of the Olympic Games, every newspaper and TV station picked up the story. Otherwise, maybe it would have been just ignored. But this is a mechanism contained in a very small box of about 1 foot by half a foot, with a thickness of just over 3 inches. And within that wooden box, there are dozens of gears, levers, all kinds of mechanical ingenious devices that once you turn one of them, all the others also turn at various speeds, etc. And they tell you, they predict lunar eclipses, they predict solar eclipses, they tell you the months, they tell you the years, they tell you the zodiacal constellation in which this or that planet would be located in 50 years from now, and so on and so forth. And all that is made, all those parts, which are really dozens, and that the gears alone, there are more than 30 gears of various sizes, are made from one single, because metallurgically it was tested, from one single thin sheet of bronze. Now, bronze is not a malleable alloy, but bronze is an alloy of copper and about 10% tin. It can be cast, and many of the ancient statues are made of bronze. It can be cast into tools by melting it and pouring it and letting it cool. But it is not malleable. There's no way that you can cut bronze, which was the ancient world steel, unless you have something stronger than that, which supposedly did not exist, with which to cut. And yet somebody from one single sheet cut all those various parts and levers and gears and axles and all the other, almost more than 100 different parts, assembled them, fitted them in this box that is only about just over 3 inches thick, and that, if you made one turn, could predict anything you wanted celestially and astronomically.
Yeah.
So the question is not only what was it for, but who had the knowledge needed, of astronomy, of orbits, of planets, of solstices, of eclipses and all that, who had that knowledge, at least in the 1st century BC, because the ship that sank, in which it was found off some Greek island called Antikythera, that's why it's called Antikythera mechanism, is dated to the 1st century BC, so it's about 100 centuries old. So there's this mechanism. So the question is not only what was it for, the question is who needed such a mechanism, because the slightest object similar to it, with just 3 or 4 gears, was made in Europe in the 16th century AD, almost 1700 years after the ship sank. Now, what is the date of the mechanism? I deal with this in my book, and I say that I link it with the Anunnaki and their departure from Earth and so on. So the question is not only, which is the latest news, what was it for, among other things they say to date the Olympics, but who had the technology to put together such a thing which beats Swiss watchmaking talents.
And you, of course, and I believe the same technology could have been used by other beings that weren't necessarily from this particular planet, but have visited it from time to time. And we are coming upon a time period in which maybe that may be returning. And when we do, Zecharia, I believe it's not inaccurate to say that the Vatican, having its own astronomical observatory and already believing that ETs do exist, that we have perhaps been visited.
I think it is so obvious by now with all the their readiness not only to believe or to expect or to suspect whatever they are, but also to start publicly stating it. The Vatican is a very conservative, to use a diplomatic term, organization, and nothing just happens by itself, and everything is pre-planned, and everything is very long-term. So I did, by the way, try to get out of this Father Funes. And I mentioned my correspondence with him in the book. But unfortunately, I couldn't meet him because he just went to Argentina at the time. What are they doing? So he sent me a report, a kind of report of the main thing that doesn't mean all the things, but whatever they're ready to disclose. And I mentioned some of that in the book, and even that alone indicates that it is not, just observing the skies to see if this or that planet really is still in the skies. It has to do with very fundamental issues for the church, and that is a basic tenet, as I understand, of Christianity, and that is the second coming. Mm-hmm. That whoever Jesus was and whatever happened to him at the right time, he will return.
Well,
and this is what they are dealing with. They're dealing with the expectations of the return.
Now, in regards to that, the end of days, Armageddon, and prophecies of the return.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about this publication, because we did not review this with you in our insane schedule that we've had in the last 3 or 4 years.
Well, it wasn't. It was published relatively recently, but we could still discuss it in another interview. But basically, what it does is it starts with a very interesting phenomenon, and that is that if one looks at the 21st century BC, if one looks at the 21st century BC and reads what happened there, the messianic expectations, the use of nuclear weapons, and all kinds of such other events, phenomena, expectations, etc., it is almost as if one is reading or following the events happening in the 21st century AD. And this, as I show in the book, is no accident, because the clock that the Anunnaki have devised to match their year, which is one orbit of their planet Nibiru, with our clock, which is rather a quick one, running around the sun in what we call 1 year, one orbit, 1 year, as a means of combining, if you want, the divine with the earthly, is something that I called celestial time, which is the zodiacal time. And the length mathematically, not actually in the heavens, and that was one of the problems that caused the use of nuclear weapons in the 21st century BC. The mathematical length of a zodiacal period is, or age, is 2,160 years.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the clock which I show in the book, The End of Days. Actually, I give a chronology of events according to that clock. That clock is ticking. And I believe, and I show again in the book with all kinds of evidence, astronomical ancient texts, pictorial evidence, archaeological finds, etc., that the timetable of the biblical prophecies, the end of days, matches this century as we near the end of the constellation of Pisces, zodiacal constellation. Mm-hmm. So this is the summary of the book from the 21st century BC to the 21st century AD. And all the prophecies that I quote, not only biblical, Babylonian, Akkadian, Egyptian, and others from antiquity, all speak about a cyclical calendar, that the beginning is the end. The first thing shall be the last thing. So it's a cycle, and we are nearing now this century the end of a cycle, which at the same time is the beginning of another one.